In 1946, the University of Chicago hired a 34-year-old Brooklyn-born son of Jewish-Hungarian immigrants to replace their outgoing professor of economic theory. His name was Milton Friedman, and over the next 50 years he would establish himself and his theories, which would form the basis for the monetarist, libertarian, and classical liberal Chicago School of Economics as some of the most influential of the 20th century. On September 11, 1973, the CIA-backed coup of Marxist Chilean President Salvador Allende, ordered by President Richard Nixon, brought down Latin America's oldest democracy. What would follow would be a 17-year-long military dictatorship led by General Augusto Pinochet, whose regime would disappear, torture, and murder around 300,000 Chilean citizens, including two influential Chilean leftist artists, Victor Jara, a beloved singer and professor known for his criticism of Pinochet and the coup. In an early display of brutality which would become commonplace in the regime, Jara disappeared for several days, imprisoned by the government, before being discovered 5 days after the coup, his hands and fingers completely broken and his body riddled with over 40 bullets, including a shot to the head. And Pablo Neruda, the world-renowned poet-diplomat whose work reached far and wide, known for his socialist leanings and for being an advisor to President Allende. Neruda was hospitalized during the coup, but rushed home due to his suspicion of having been injected by a doctor with an unknown substance that Pinochet had ordered his murder, a suspicion which proved correct years later. Upon returning home, Neruda died mere days later. Despite the government's rejection of his funeral being made a public event, thousands of grieving Chileans ignored the curfew and filled the streets to bid a tearful farewell to the beloved wordsmith. This would be just the beginning of an uncompromising reign of terror and bloodshed. Less than 2 years since the beginning of the dictatorship in 1975, Pinochet, influenced by the financial backing he received from the United States, sought the advice of a group of Chilean economists, most of whom had been trained at Friedman's Chicago School, who came to popularly be known as the Chicago Boys. They helped the regime implement the most extreme examples of Friedman's theories, such as mass privatization, sweeping cuts to government spending, IMF and World Bank debt restructuring, creation of a stock market, among many other neoliberal reforms. Chile became the first nation subject to receive the so-called shock therapy of neoliberal capitalism, as what would become of the Russian Federation due to Boris Yeltsin's reforms in the 1990s. These policies led to elite business oligarchs, the grupos, gaining control over most all sectors of the Chilean economy and financial institutions, growing comfortable and wealthy, all while homelessness grew from 27% to 40%, and poverty grew from 20% to 44.4%. Even with Friedman's declaration of the miracle of Chile, most economists would disagree and look to it as the failure of the Chicago School of Economics. Oddly enough, some modern American libertarians, conservatives, neoliberals, and anarcho-capitalists praise Pinochet as a misunderstood hero who saved Chile from communism, despite the atrocities and failure of his economic programs. And they still hail the, as Plato would say, philosopher king who made so much of it possible, Milton Friedman, as an unquestionable genius, and continue to advocate the same policies to be imposed all over the globe, oftentimes with the open call for another Pinochet. Chapter 1. What is Turning Point USA? Well, that was rather depressing, wasn't it? I promise the rest won't be quite like that, since now we have to talk about one of the youngest public acolytes of Friedman, Charlie Kirk, and his organization, Turning Point USA. I don't want to bore people with a ton of history or anything, but we're gonna have to look back to how he began. Charlie Kirk was a conservative high school graduate from Wheeling, Illinois in 2012, son of Robert Kirk, a project manager of Trump Towers. Telling, isn't it? With dreams of attending West Point, his spot was stolen through affirmative action. which is not a fact, but a claim made by Charlie Kirk, with no evidence. Moving on, instead of applying to another college, Charlie stayed in his parents' home and started writing articles for Breitbart, describing how high schools have become indoctrinating hubs for leftists and Marxists. From these writings, he found his way onto Fox News to spread his message further, which led to his coming into contact with Tea Party activist Bill Montgomery and billionaire Republican donor Foster Friess, the men who would give him all he needed to begin the monstrosity that is Turning Point USA. So what is Turning Point USA? It's a non-profit, conservative organization who want to save college campuses and, in turn, Western civilization, like you do, from Marxists and leftists by promoting free markets and limited government through student governments. They are a truly awful organization, and I don't just say that because they are neoliberal, laissez-faire capitalists, but because of how they love to smugly mislead everyone about, well, everything, really, such as who funds them. So on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Who's bankrolling? You may or may not have heard of the now infamous meltdown Charlie had at Politicon in 2018 during a debate when he was asked by a member of the audience what his salary was.
The point is larger than that, Charlie.
I live like a capitalist every single day, Cenk. I live as a
Hey,
capitalist,
hey,
okay?
hey.
I live what I believe.
No.
What do? I get charity every single year.
Hold on.
What's my salary?
Charlie.
Less than his.
Charlie, take
Come on,
a seat.
Cenk, let's go.
Charlie,
What are you doing? Sit down.
Take a seat.
Sit
Take
down,
a seat.
Psycho.
All right, no.
What are
Take
you
a
doing?
seat. You're gonna take a seat. You're gonna take a seat over here.
Oh my God.
What's my salary?
All right.
Ridiculous. All right, behave, everyone. Jesus
Okay.
Christ.
Okay.
I practice what
Hey,
I preach, Cenk.
Charlie.
You
Stop.
do not practice what you preach.
Charlie.
Now, once everyone has stopped laughing at this gem, you may be asking yourself why, after he was mostly calm just a little before this, that a simple question would so trigger that response. If you did think that, then you're on the right track. Charlie and the rest of TPUSA love to claim they are a grassroots organization which has thousands of individual donors all over the country, and also is aimed towards influencing 18 to 24-year-olds. Both of those points come in pretty stark contrast with the old, moneyed interests that actually fund the damn thing. Among the donors that have been actually confirmed, there is former Illinois governor and private equity executive Bruce Rauner, Republican megadonor Richard Ullian, healthcare product company CEO and GOP donor Vince Foglia, Home Depot co-founder and GOP donor Bernie Marcus, roofing and paving CEO Gary Rabin, the DeVos family, Michigan GOP megadonors, the Bradley family, same thing as the DeVosses, Charlie's boy, Wyoming investment manager Foster Friess, former Las Vegas Sands Corporation CEO Mike Levin, the NRA, computer software entrepreneur and Scientologist Craig Jensen, the Einhorn Family Foundation, Montana Congressman and felon Greg Gianforte, billionaire GOP megadonors Charles and David Koch, fracking billionaire executives and far-right Christian fundamentalists, the Wilkes brothers. Whew. So goddamn many, Jesus. Speaking of those last two, the Wilkes brothers happen to also be the sole funders of PragerU, the YouTube, not university, run by neoconservative talk radio host Dennis Prager, and they also basically own the Daily Wire, the site of conservative pseudo-intellectual Ben Shapiro. But they're for another day. By the way, the amount of money that all of those donors made up was $5 million in just 2016, and even then, there are a bunch of donors we still don't know about since TPUSA isn't required to make that public as a 501c3. It's ridiculous that they could ever claim something so incorrect as being grassroots or anything other than yet another front for billionaires and special interests to masquerade their advocating for more power and influence behind an unhealthy love for capitalism and conservatism. Because we don't have enough of those, right? Anyways, now that we know who at least partially funds TPUSA, let's get into what they are actually paying for. Chapter 3. Rhetoric and Actions. Well, since its inception, TPUSA has racked up a slew of examples of probably/definitely illegal activities, authoritarian tendencies, agitating left-wingers and socialists, promoting people like Milo Yiannopoulos, sexual assault/disrespecting victims of it, and racism. A lot of racism. But hold on, it's coming soon. So, as for the illegal stuff, TPUSA has used those millions to bankroll student government elections to help elect far-right conservatives, and clearly has openly volunteered for Republican state and federal campaigns. Both of those are not legal for 501c3s. On the authoritarian stuff, just after Trump's victory in November of 2016, TPUSA launched the Professor Watch List, a McCarthyite effort to record all leftist college professors who don't line up with conservative capitalist and neoliberal worldview. What are the specific requirements for being put on the list? Well, a professor just has to have made kind of lefty or liberal sounding word things, and bam, on the list. Am I the only one who is kinda unnerved by that? Moving on. Oh, Milo. You disgusting, horrific garbage fire excuse for a human being. This man has outed trans people and made them leave their college, threatened to dox illegal immigrants at the border, is just openly misogynistic while using the shield that he's just anti-feminist, is homophobic despite being gay. His supporters have publicly assaulted and even shot people who disagree with him. He jumped on the Gamergate controversy to forward his own career, has a penchant for using anti-Semitic personal passwords such as Kristall, reference to Kristallnacht, and Long Knives 1290, both about Kristallnacht and the year Edward I expelled all Jews from England, bragged about paying a Jewish journalist $14.88, 14 being a neo-Nazi dog whistle to their 14 words, and 88 being code for Heil Hitler, was revealed to have ties to neo-Nazis, white nationalists, and Holocaust deniers, and was trying to normalize them and their rhetoric through his privileged senior editor position at Breitbart. He's Jewish, by the way. And was only finally brought down when, while being a victim of pedophilia, he advocated for and protected pedophiles. But of course, TPUSA gave that guy a platform to spew his venom. You can really tell a group is awful when allegations of sexual assault and victim shaming seem to be side points to the rest of the awfulness. At a now infamous West Palm Beach TPUSA event in 2017, attendees, students, were reportedly drinking copious amounts of alcohol, not just in their hotel rooms, but many were wandering drunkenly around the lobby and the pool, most of whom were underage. There seems to have been no staff protocol for dealing with that situation, which doesn't even include the fact that most of the staff wasn't old enough to drink themselves, and they were absolutely not prepared for the following events. 2 days later, at least 3 female students reported to staffers that they had been victims of sexual assault. One said a male student had groped her and shoved his hands down her pants while she was sleeping. Another said someone shoved her against an elevator wall and, quote, shoved his tongue down my throat. And another said she was pinned to her bed by one of the students. Of course, TPUSA handled the whole thing terribly and incompetently, with a ridiculously inadequate response that immediately undermined the victims telling the staffers what happened, told them to handle it themselves, and didn't even record the victims' goddamn names. But that doesn't even get into Communications Director Candace Owens, don't have time for her, response to the Me Too movement, who said in a tweet that the women involved were stupid, weak, and inconsequential, as well as her openly endorsing the mockery of sexual assault to brush off the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. Oh, and exploiting the death of Molly Tibbetts, a young woman killed in Iowa by an illegal immigrant, for political points before getting into a Twitter fight with Tibbetts' family. God, this dumbass organization is just the worst. And the racism. Oh, the racism. TPUSA seems to keep, accidentally, hiring racists. As quickly as I can, I'll run down the examples. Crystal Clanton, former TPUSA National Field Director, known for saying, "I hate black people. Like, them all. I hate blacks. End of story." As well as constantly referring to black people as the N-word. Shiley Grumman, her replacement, who tweeted, "All this garbage," among other slurs. Timon Prax, TPUSA Midwest Regional Director, known for his various racist, Islamophobic, ableist, and anti-Semitic tweets and comments. Their posting of a quote from Nelson Mandela, oddly enough, and all of the commenters started calling him a communist terrorist. Juan Pablo Andrade, Florida TPUS Field Director, who was filmed in a hotel room saying, "The only thing the Nazis didn't get right is they didn't keep fucking going." Caesar Subveri, in the room with Andrade at the time, was also an alt-right racist who marched at Unite the Right in Charlottesville. The entire chapter of TPUSA Florida International University, whose group chat was shown to be talking about Richard Spencer, Jew-hating, being racist in general, jokes about Charlottesville, threatening to call ICE on illegals, watching underage cartoon porn, and most awful, sharing a racist Pepe the Frog meme showing two Syrian men raping a white Swedish woman at gunpoint. Oh boy, sweet commie Jesus, let me transition out of this. Okay, so that's all the substantive awfulness the TPUSA has done. At least I hope so. But probably not. There's just too much garbage that they spew, and I'm not making a 5-hour video. But now, I'm going to get to a less immediately awful-seeming thing. That being Charlie Kirk's actual love. The unregulated capitalism of Milton Friedman. Chapter 4. Milton, Charlie, and capitalism. If there is one figure that Charlie would probably say is his influence, it most definitely would be Milton Friedman.
The further down that rabbit hole you get, the more you read Milton Friedman, the more you understand the foundational principles and ideas. I found Milton Friedman, and I found
Capitalism is the best way to help people. America's the greatest country in the history of the world, and the Constitution's the greatest political document ever written by man.
There are plenty of other similar thinkers and academics in the libertarian sphere, like Ayn Rand, Ludwig von Mises, or Friedrich Hayek, all of whom I may talk about more in the future. However, the one person who Charlie most often recommends is his boy Friedman. Why might that be? Well, Friedman is the choice economist for neoliberals, conservatives, and laissez-faire capitalists, since his theories and policies seem to confirm their previously held beliefs, and that they don't have to seriously question the consequences of what such ideas have on the world in general. And what an influence Milton Friedman has had. He was a professor at the Chicago School for over 30 years before joining a conservative DC-based think tank, the Hoover Institution, for another 30, and in the meantime was an economic advisor to President Ronald Reagan and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Which makes it all the more odd when Charlie makes it out that nobody takes conservatives seriously. Their ideas are great, but no one wants to hear them, and that neoliberal capitalism has benefited the world so amazingly. it has certainly done a lot of good for rich capitalists, first world nations, and middle-class people for a little while, before everything started to come crashing down for the latter. But that is the inherent problem with Charlie and his organization. He poses his mission as a conquest, a valiant mission to save colleges from some made-up scourge of leftism that's going to ruin America. But when faced with the very real problems in his own neoliberal capitalist country, the answer always seems to be less regulation, less government, more freedom, more of the same. The same policies that have led to the exact problems he's saying they'll fix. It is, to say the least, a suicidal defense of the status quo, the Washington Consensus, you might say. Oh, sorry. What's the Washington Consensus? It is the overall agreement in Washington, D.C. that neoliberalism, laissez-faire capitalism, privatization, economic liberalism, free markets, and deregulation are good. The same stuff that Charlie loves to promote and leads to elitist plutocrats, while saying he's against elitist plutocrats. But I suppose thinking he'd look at such a thing as hypocrisy would be far too charitable to Charlie. After all, his Superman, his Ubermensch, his dear leader, Milton Friedman, would do the exact same thing. Chapter 5. Milton and Pinochet. Milton Friedman, the beloved and exalted economist of all libertarians and neoliberals, always made out his theories to be in pursuit of freedom and liberty, truly Enlightenment-era type thinking. However, he had no problem compromising all of those values when Pinochet, a brutal and fascist military dictator, wanted to implement his theories, and was completely fine with waving away on thousands that were imprisoned and tortured by waterboarding, dropped in a tank of water upside down, electrocution of the chest and genitals while tied to a metal bed frame, breaking of bones with large vehicles, solitary confinement in a completely dark room while naked combined with sleep deprivation, beat until deaf and unconscious, the telephone technique, forced to crawl on the ground and lick up dirt. If there was complaint, they were executed, put in vats of disgusting substances or forced to ingest it. Rape of both men and women, though particularly of women, who would sometimes be sexually assaulted with spiders, live rats, their male family members, and even specially trained dogs. And that was before they were murdered or otherwise slaughtered. Some were even taken on Pinochet-specific helicopter rides, which has become, unfortunately and disgustingly, a meme in right-wing circles. What is the helicopter meme, you may ask? Well, what it actually was Pinochet and his goons taking political prisoners, of which there were many, on helicopter rides over the jungle to the ocean and throwing them into the sea to their death. There are around 200 or so confirmed deaths from this technique. I am truly sorry for going into those details, but you really have to understand the depth of depravity we're dealing with. Friedman himself tried defending this in 1991, a year after the Pinochet regime had finally been kicked out, and said that without his policies, Chile wouldn't have such economic success. Which, by the way, isn't even true. As stated at the beginning, homelessness increased from 27% to 40%, and poverty from 20% to 44.4%. But that's not all. Students in public and private education decreased from 30% to 25%, GDP dropped by 14%, wages decreased by 8%, family allowances fell by 28%, military spending increased by 120%, tens of thousands of state sector employees were fired as it was cut away, corruption and debt increased exponentially, the pension system and healthcare were both privatized as well as superior expedition, distinctly unstable shantytowns exploded in numbers, and rapid deindustrialization overtook the country. A complete and utter economic failure that was only barely held together by the various nationalization policies retained from the Allende government, such as Codelco, Chile's state-owned copper mining company and the largest copper-producing company in the world. Despite literally all of the evidence, Friedman still labeled this the miracle of Chile. Nothing could really speak more truthfully to this hypocrisy than this quote from Orlando Letelier, a refugee of the regime and leader of the resistance Pinochet, who wrote in his 1976 article in The Nation about it, which I'll leave a link to the whole thing in the description below. It is curious that the man who wrote a book, Capitalism and Freedom, to drive home his argument that only classical economic liberalism can support political democracy, can now so easily disentangle economics from politics when the economic theories he advocates coincide with an absolute restriction of every type of democratic freedom. One would logically expect that if those who curtail private enterprise are held responsible for the effects of their measures in the political sphere, those who impose unrestrained economic freedom would also be held responsible when the imposition of this policy is inevitably accompanied by massive repression, hunger, unemployment, and the permanence of a brutal police state. In 1976, same year as the article, Letelier was assassinated in Washington, D.C. in a car bombing by Dirección de Inteligencia Nacional, Pinochet's secret police force. By the way, yes, that should most definitely be considered an act of terrorism on U.S. soil. Yet nothing was done about it. Consider that for a moment. In conclusion, Turning Point USA portrays itself as a grassroots student organization promoting free market and conservative values to combat leftism and Marxism on college campuses. The truth? It is a billionaire-funded mouthpiece for failed neoliberal policies with occasional awful racism, anti-Semitism, and authoritarianism. It's almost Shakespearean how much Charlie Kirk is a corrupt, hypocritical, wannabe oligarch shouting about freedom. And all of this is, honestly, just a continuation of the rank hypocrisy of Milton Friedman, whose shining star deserves a lot more tarnishing than it's gotten. I've already given a quote, so I'm just going to end with this TPUSA meme. Enjoy. And thank you for watching.